Hi, welcome everyone to Pop Cult X. Today we have a very cool guest with us, Jack Foster, author and artist, a little redundant there, and creator of the graphic novel Gun comic book. So welcome very much for joining us.
Oh, no, thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And author and writer, that, you know what, that's it works perfectly.
Yeah. A man of many titles, right?
You end up wearing a lot of hats.
Yeah. So one of the things that was really cool is I met you and purchased your book a couple conventions ago, and wanted to have you on the podcast so we can talk about your work. Really impressed with the book itself. The look of it is really incredible. It has a very cinematic quality. For those that haven't read it, I definitely recommend that you go out and pick it up. So I'm really excited to finally have you on. Can you share with us a little bit about Gun? It's your project that you've worked on and released. Can you give us a little bit of a synopsis of what it's all about?
Yes, I can. But first, I'll send you a link and you can add it to the show notes. But you can read it for free. So what you have there is Gun Volume 1, which is a trade paperback collecting the first 3 issues of Gun, the first story arc. And if anyone wants to read it, you can read it absolutely for free on Global Comics.
Oh, nice.
And I'll send a link to that so you can check it out. And then the copy you just held up, you can't tell because it's beautiful summer daylight, but it's a glow in the dark cover. So if you like it, by all means, get the cover. It's got a little nice. If you like glow in the dark, it's super cool. So Gun. All right, like we all like Batman, but the really fun characters are the villains. Like the villains are that's where you get to kind of have the most dynamic range. So I thought like, hey, what if you take the villain and you put him on the marquee? You know, you make it his story and sort of like flip it. So it's like the world of superheroes from the other side of like Superman's fist. And so like with that as the kind of opening premise, I came up with a character who I've told the story a bunch, and it's in the back of the book in the sort of back matter. But the whole story kind of started off as a pitch to DC to take one of their villain characters, Count Vertigo, who I think is a Green Arrow, like a long-standing Green Arrow villain. And I thought like, okay, what if we took this character and I had thought of it because, you know, this is going back quite a few years. I thought of it as kind of like a Vertigo treatment, you know, like what if you sort of like take the fact that he's a villain as a starting point and then just spin the story out from there. So I kind of took that character, what I knew about them historically and like what was in the who's who, and kind of like scrapped all that and just built him up from scratch and kind of like kind of filled it out from there and filled his world out from there. I pitched it to DC, which is generous. You know, I went to San Diego and I dropped it in their bin. They did not. They weren't interested. But I kind of thought, like, at that point, you know, I had created a portfolio with about 5 or 6 pages from that story, or not from that story. I made a mini story. Just kind of like a journalist is interviewing him about his life and crimes. And when I was sort of building that out, I got like kind of a lot of the sort of like the basics for the story kind of put in place. And even though DC passed, I liked the idea. I thought like, you know, because I'd been kind of coming up with a lot of different comic book ideas and some stuck and some didn't. And when I landed on that, I was just like this, I don't know, like I felt like there was a lot of runway to go down. This is going back now, I think 15, maybe even closer to 17 years. So the idea of the villain story at that time, there were a few. I think Dexter was just starting. Wicked. The book was out, and maybe the musical was just kind of finding its legs. But the idea of telling a story from the villain's point of view was still slightly novel. In the intervening 20 years, it's become very dominant. So I have to kind of like shoulder in amongst a bunch of other people with that same idea. But I like the idea, so I took it. What we say is we scrub off the serial numbers, so it was no longer Count Vertigo. It was Mr. Twist, but the same, you know, like same basics. In fact, if you go through the first issue, there's a lot of certain characters I give different names, but you can like one of them is clearly Katana, the character from the Suicide Squad. Bruce Wayne pops in. So there's a bunch of DC stand-ins who I kind of reversed, but I like the idea after all of kind of creating my own world and populating it. The thing that is cool if you take an existing story is people are familiar with the history and there's a lot of little Easter eggs you can weave in. But the nice thing about sort of like once I kind of was unyoked from like having to stick to the DCU is you really can create anything you want. And that is sort of like the fun and frequently the challenge of this book. Sorry, I just spoke a lot.
No, not at all. It really goes to show your passion about your project, right? And the perseverance. We've had a lot of guests on that have talked about their comic books and their experiences as a writer or as an artist. And one of the things that kind of has come up as a common theme is if you are really passionate and really love something, you have to keep at it, and it's not going to come overnight, but you have to keep working on it. So again, hearing that this project of yours 15, 17 years in the making that you've been working on, and that you finally culminated in a project that you're proud of, I think is something that is really good for artists out there to hear, that are maybe getting a little bit discouraged that the first time that they show their work to someone, they don't get immediately picked up, that you can go out there and kind of work at it and eventually you can get your work put out.
Um, so to speak to that, so uh, I ran a Kickstarter for the first issue. This is back. I think this is now that Kickstarter is like 11 or 12 years old. So this was we had a bit of a Kickstarter boom in the last, I'd say, like 5 years since the pandemic, which is great. And I think Kickstarter is the number one publisher of comics going right now. But this was a little before then. When I kickstarted the book, my plan was it would cover the printing of the first issue, and then I would take that to Diamond, the big comic book distributor, and they would pick the book up, and then I would be in shops and and it would be very issue after issue, very easy. And the kind of first trade, I succeeded in my Kickstarter, which at that time it was really like uncertain. I felt like I had a pretty high ask. It was like $10,000, not just for the printing, but also for kind of like getting the book on its way. And it just seemed like an enormous amount of money to ask people to chip in for. Luckily, like I had succeeded at that. I met with Diamond at San Diego, and I submitted a packet. They rejected the packet, but gave some notes. I took the notes and gave them a second, a revised version with their notes and with the second issue. So I had sent the first issue the first time, and then the second time a revised version of the first issue and the second issue, and they just declined it completely. Now this just is a little inside baseball. I don't know if people care about this part. The distribution is very unsexy. But for the distributor, you have Marvel and DC, which is like 50% of that previews catalog. And then in the back, after IDW, Image, and Boom, is just like 70 pages of all the rest. And it is really, really, really hard for a one-off publisher, which is to say someone who's just doing one book, to really distinguish themselves in that group. This isn't them being discerning, like this is, good or bad. It's them sort of protecting the retailer, because the retailer, a lot of these comic shop owners, this is back before Diamond broke. And then we had 3 different distributors. But if you can imagine, before, when there was only one distributor, like comic shops, which is already a difficult job. One of my first jobs was at a comic shop. I feel like I know comic retail culture very well, from both sides, from being a creator and also from being a person just trying to make the rent. And those guys work very hard. And they don't necessarily want to spend 2 weeks filling out an order form. So, Diamond, to kind of, I think, make their job a little easier, their policy is like, hey, if it's good work, kick it to one of the other publishers who's already in the book, rather than letting all these one-off people. Now, that has kind of been the prevailing notion. I think things might be changing. As I mentioned, Diamond broke up, and now we're not broke up. Diamond, DC and Marvel both left Diamond, and now there's Lunar and Penguin Random House. Oh my god, this has got to be so boring. So all that to
Not at
say,
all.
it was a real blow not getting in diamond because it kind of did. It's the difference between like diamonds minimums. This is going back 10 years. They may be a little different now. Were roughly $2,000, which makes sense because if you aren't selling about $2,000 worth of inventory when you account for printing and shipping, you're really not making a profit. So like if you can't meet that minimum, like they'll kind of put you on notice and get those numbers up, or they'll decline to carry you. This is a problem for everybody. This is a problem for like even for the big publishers. Like they have a little more leeway in this area, but like a book that does well, but is critically liked, but doesn't necessarily make good numbers units wise. Like that's why we have like the same things over and over again, and why it's so hard to launch new characters.
Okay.
So diamonds, basically, they want you to hit their minimums. 2,000 units is like not bad. Like on a month to month basis, you could live on that. If you're not in diamond, it goes down drastically. Like you are talking about selling like in the hundreds, and that is like everybody's different. So don't use this as a litmus for your own work. But for me personally, when I started out, it was in the tens, which then finally got to the hundreds, and then not deep into it. So what I know colloquially from talking to other creators and just kind of having been at this for a while, 400 is a good number. Like if you're doing 400 units and that's sort of like selling those, whether you're distributing them yourself through like an email site, or I mean a website, or if you're going to conventions and pushing inventory that way, 400 is like, wow, you're actually doing very well in the indie quarter. Some people do better than that. So I'm not saying that's the speed limit. I'm just saying like that's about, and for me personally, over time I can hit that. Like after 2 or 3 years, I can, but it's not, it takes, there's a lot of work to get to that. So with that in mind, 400 still really far from 2000. So like for me, it took the idea of this book from being like, oh, this is going to be my main job, to like, well, there's no way you can sustain yourself on this. So that was a big stumbling block. And just for me personally, I had worked in advertising before I got in. I was working on comics all the time, but I mean, my primary job was in advertising. I got into a kind of a nice job that was paying well. I live in California, so like the pay rate for creatives is I think better than it is in other states. I was making good money. I lived very cheap. I had a cheap apartment, cheap single bedroom, like efficiency. I had a cheap car. I kept all my expenses low. I saved up a lot of money, and then I had like a magic number in my head. When I hit this number, stop. I'll switch over, work full time on the comic, do the Kickstarter, and then that part of my life will start. And so, I did that, and then ran out of money. And also, like, right? there's no plan beyond that. If Diamond doesn't take you, there's not much you can do. I had some kind of I had some. You know what? I got great advice when Diamond came back and said no. My partner, who's not in comics, but supportive of what I do, was like, look, not everyone gets it on the first. The thing to do now is just keep putting yourself in positions where you can continue to swing, and like maybe one of those, finally the ball, gets you on base. And which is to say, like, don't give up, don't like, chuck it all, you're done, just keep making opportunities. So when Diamond said no, I built a database of comic shops, which there used to be an old resource called the master list. This is no longer useful because comic shops come and go so quickly. But you can use Comic Shop Locator, just put in area codes and then see what pops up, and then just build. It's going to be close to 2,000 addresses and emails. And so I sent out an email. I sent out to everybody a postcard just saying like, hey, here's a book and here's how to order it. You let them order it for 50% off, which is usual wholesale. I called it like micro distributing. You come through me directly instead of going through Diamond. I cover shipping, and you get the book at half off. So for everybody, I sent a postcard kind of explaining that, and an email. I was about a month out from my release date, which is an arbitrary number, but it helps everybody kind of have a handle on it. And then like I followed up 2 weeks before and then 1 week the week of. And then in addition to that, stores that I knew were very indie friendly. So from that list of 2,000, I narrowed it down to about 100. So those guys, I sent 60 of them. I sent one issue of the comic. Like, hey, here's my book. If you like it, order it. And then the other 40, like the really like, Midtown in New York, the big stores.
Mhm.
I mean, the big indie friendly stores. I sent 3 copies of the comic. I was like, hey, put these out. If they sell, send me the money. If they don't, or if they sell, order number two. If they don't, I lost a little money on them. And from that, I got sort of like an initial run of orders for the first issue, and again, nothing spectacular, nothing to set the world on fire, but like it was a start. It was that thing of like keep swinging, and then from that, I could go through, like anyone can go through like a series of small successes and small losses. And the thing is, I think, to go back to sort of your original question or your original statement, just like if you, and this applies to everything, it doesn't apply to comics necessarily or strictly, it can apply to anything. The thing that you like, be realistic. Like I think like a thing in comics is like, hey, this is not a very lucrative industry. And it's not like, oh, there's there's a bunch of people with a lot of money keeping it from everybody else. Truly, like I think like all the big publishers would like to pay everybody better. It's really hard. Like the cost of the product is expensive. Um, Printing is expensive. Paying creatives, a decent rate. Like when you think about an artist and how much work an artist does, like when you break that down hourly, like these people are getting paid usually like fast food wage. But if you paid them accurately, then the price goes up. Like you have to sell this book at $5. You have to sell this book at whatever Marvel and DC are selling their books at.
Yeah.
And because they do such high quantities, like they can take losses. And also they're taking in a lot of money from other, merchandising options.
Mhm.
But you were still sort of behold, like it's, if you're going to say like, hey, on a rack right next to an X-Men that's $5, mine is $10, and you've never heard of my team of losers, then like it's harder to persuade people to like give you the extra $5. So you kind of are held at the speed limit of what the major players in the industry are doing, and that is really rough. It's expensive to print. It's expensive to ship. You can't charge as much as you would like to for the amount of work you do. I think most writers will tell you, like artists, it's a longer job. Writing can take a week. Drawing a full book can take, for normal people, a month or two. For me, 2 years. So, like it's a really, so it's hard to make money in this industry. So if you want to kind of like, if you want security, if you want to like save up for a house, if those things are important to you, like just understand that comics may not be your ladder to that. But if it's like, like, oh, I love this medium and I want to contribute to it, then you just find a way, like that's, it's not easy. And every path is kind of like really specific, kind of like a fingerprint to the person who's on it. Advice for one person isn't going to necessarily help you. I hear a lot of stuff that I did completely the opposite, and not to say like, hey, I'm an example of how it works, just to say like, just because you hear a lot of, like, oh, start with short stories and stay away from big arcs, honestly, this thing is going to require you to make such sacrifices and work so hard for it and give up so much for it. If you're not 100%, 1,000% in love with it,
Mm-hmm.
then it's hard to stay faithful to it through all the lean times. So it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you are doing the thing that you really love. Like the world is full of a lot of stuff. Why not put some stuff that people love in the world?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, that
Definitely.
was a lot of talking too. Sorry.
No,
And thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
it gives a lot of great insight into, what can be a really mysterious and sort of like behind the scenes look at how things are created. I think that for some people, they're like, they just see the book and on the shelf and they're like, how did that happen? How did a creator create this book and it get on a shelf in a comic book shop? And there's a lot of mystery to that. So thanks for speaking to that. One of the things that I think you said when you compare your book, like let's say next to it, it's next to an X-Men book, and someone doesn't know your book. One of the things that immediately attracted me to your book is the visuals of it. It's very visually stunning, and I wanted to ask you what sort of is the artistic process of creating the book because it has a very artistic, like painterly feel. So I'm curious if like, is it painted? Like, is there watercolor? I'm not an artist. I like doodle on like white pages, white pieces of paper. So I have like no idea, but it has a very artistic feel to it. So what kind of process do you have to create the book?
Oh, so actually, I think if you're watching this as well as listening, that's my art table behind me.
Oh, nice.
Um, uh, I it is painted. Thank you. I mean, first of all, thank you for the kind of things you said. So I was really influenced. Um, I mean, I've been a comic fan. Like, I got my first comic when I was like 8 or 9. It was in a gas station back when gas stations used to have newsstands, and it got me kind of hooked early on. I've been like a lifelong fan of comics. I've always wanted to make comics, which isn't actually very. I think 98% of people who read comics have a comic they want to make. I think part of the love of comics is also like I want to tell stories of this world. I think comics really put me on the path of wanting to be. It was like tracing comics that made me like I would spend a lot of time drawing, and then that became it. Like I went to an art magnet school. I was lucky in that back then, they really discouraged you from just drawing comics. They didn't take it very seriously. They wanted to still train you as an artist. Now they'll let you. Like I think you can take graphic noveling as a course, which is great. But I think because they sort of like broke me in on these processes of art, which weren't strictly it was all forms of painting, all forms of drawing, 3D stuff, sculpture. Like they just wanted you to try everything and grow. And that kind of put me like on the path of wanting to be like a watercolor artist. Like I love watercolor. I remember the first one I saw. I mean, I'd seen watercolors. I was at a art fair, and it was just it was like a still life of like a Monopoly board and Monopoly money and other things, shells. It was Florida, and it was just so. I just loved the style of it. I loved the way it looked. I loved everything about it, and like that. Once I started playing with watercolor, I was like, oh, this is it. This is my medium. I love this. And it was, I think because I was doing so much, kind of fine art training, that made me think like, oh, I don't want to just color my own comics. I want to be a watercolorist. And as a watercolorist, apply the techniques of watercolor to the thing that I do artistically. Now, I just want to say this. This was so easy at 17. Like, oh, I'll just be a watercolorist. And of course, you'll be great at that. And then you just make comics and they'll be great too. And I want to say it's only in the last couple of years where I finally feel like, oh, the thing I thought in my head is finally the thing I'm able to squeeze out of my hands.
Nice.
But it was a long period of credit. Like you're sort of living on artistic credit that you don't necessarily have the talent to pay for, but if you stay with it, like it's the whole idea behind punk, right? So punk is, you get out, you make some noise, you grab a guitar, you clang through the 2 hour set, you're done. But you keep playing your guitar night after night, show after show. After about 2 or 3 years, hey, guess what? You're a good guitarist. So it's the same thing with art. If you keep at it, you will get better at it. And I think like everyone has a different like. Some people only want to draw comic books, which is fine, and some people like it doesn't. Wherever you are in the spectrum, if you're like, I want to be a fine artist, I want to be a comic book artist, I just want to do like cartoon scribbles. Anywhere on the spectrum, you can stay where you're at. Like master what you do, just keep doing it. You can always grow. You can always evolve. You can always you're just never locked in on anything. So for me, I tried to keep like it was like there were like it was like being in a video game and you've got three different, you've got your health and your magic and your, I don't know what the other, a third one.
Energy, stamina. There you
Exactly.
go.
So you're trying to keep all those levels up. Like I tried to like train myself as a writer to keep getting better as a writer, not just writing comic books. And I wanted to train myself as a watercolor, so keep getting better at watercolor, not just comics. And I wanted to train myself and keep getting better at drawing and not just comic books. And then hopefully there would be a point when these things all connected, you know, like the drawing led to good painting and the painting told, you know, helped tell these stories. I did not let the fact that that wasn't happening yet stop me from making the first issue. So, like, I think by about issue 6, like, oh, they are starting to work together now. Like, they're all starting to kind of come together. So, I would say, like, it's a kind of another version of the thing from before. Like, keep swinging, keep trying. If you're frustrated, look, there are enough voices in the world that will tell you you're not good at this. Stop. Oh, like you don't have to make that voice. Like you will hear it from other people, and people who are great hear it. You know? So like that is a noise that's in the universe that you're going to hear anyway. So like, I think your job is to just make. You know, just keep making and keep making and keep making. And if there's a point for you where you don't understand what you're doing anymore, or it feels inauthentic, or you're like, I don't like how this makes me feel, then maybe that's you telling yourself, it's time to pull the plug on this. But if you keep making and you're still excited by the making and like no matter what, like you can release something and nobody reads it, but if you love it, you still accomplish something. You can release it and you know, like, oh, it's critically well received, but doesn't sell. Like if you are proud of it, keep making it. You know, like there are a lot of metrics to measure success. This is a very success barren industry. So like I think if the only yardstick is how many units you're selling, then that's not necessarily valuable data. You know, like I think if you feel like, oh, I'm enjoying the stuff that I make, I'm proud of the stuff that I make. When people respond to it, like I get energized, then I think you're on the right path. You know, and just keep plowing through.
Yeah. Do you think being the auteur, I guess, of comic books, doing both the writing and the artistry of it, has proved to be more challenging, or makes it easier for you because you know what the visuals want you know what visuals you want to match your words with?
So um, for me, it's hard to imagine the other way. Like I can't imagine, you know, like even when I write, I'm just writing and I'm not, you know, I'm not even sketching down panels or thumbnails, you know. So, but even when I'm writing, you know, like you see it, you know, in your head. So for me, it's foreign to think that you would like, like, I mean, a joke that I always say is like, I was the cheapest artist I could find, which is a little true. But I will say I hear other people talk, and when I hear writers talk about their relationships with their artists and how collaborative it is, and that like you have half of something, and then somebody comes in and they fill in the missing places and add new stuff, like I get jealous because I'm like, God, wouldn't that be nice? So here's what I think. I think the answer to that is I have tried and struggled with collaborating with other people.
Okay.
Which is not to it wasn't no reflection on them. It's just like it's the process I'm comfortable with is you know kind of working both knobs. And I think for other people, I think I think for one thing, it's a real limitation if you're a writer and you can't draw, you are stuck. And then I think it takes a real amount of discipline for a lot of artists to sort of say like, hey, someone else should actually do the writing. Todd McFarlane, we're talking to you. So you know what? Actually, cut that. I don't need him. But I think the thing is, like, I think the answer to all these, like, I think the answer is always like, hey, imagine yourself as a creative, like all humans. You start off as a teenager, you know. So like think of how teenagers are. They're, you know, way powered up in certain areas, like confidence and the sense of purpose, and then way deficient in other areas like skill, experience, and
Yeah.
wisdom.
Yeah.
And so like, over time, you as an artist will get to know yourself better. You'll understand yourself better, and you will like through like both easy and difficult processes learn where your strengths and weaknesses are and what works for you. And I think a thing there are certainly a lot of artists who or writers, there are a lot of people creators who can do both, who also collaborate, you know, so like you're also never stuck in one region. I think for me personally, a thing that it always comes back to is time. Like unfortunately I'm a very slow worker, which is, I think sometimes people think like this guy just lollygags. And if anyone knew, like I'm a 7 day a week worker, it's like being the president. I do this job every day of my life. Well, I'm glad to, I'm happy to. Like I said, I gave up a job to do this, and every day I'm thrilled. But I work so much, and it takes so so for me to say like, oh, hey, I'm going to take on a project and it's going to be like at the least 6 months and then possibly a year for somebody else. Like I have to really love that other story. Like I would love one of my own. And that is, you know, like, that's the sort of like, that's how high the limbo bar is.
So
Gotcha.
I wanted to ask you about pop culture because I looking at your books and your artwork, I've gotten some cool prints by you as well. Um, I'm assuming that you're a big fan of pop culture and that you sort of strain those influences into your work and but how does that I'm always curious with an artist, how does that work? Do you when you're creating a character and you create someone that's so visually stunning, is it just straight out from your head, or do you see something like, let's say, fashion wise, and you say, "Oh, that's really cool. I want to take a piece of that and combine it with, this actress," or how does that work? Is it just your inspiration, like it just comes out of your creative genius?
Well, you know, I wish. I think a lot of so when I started this, uh, so when I was a kid, I would make up comic book stories, and like it's just been like a fantasy, like a place I go to in my head that I like when I would, you know, you walk to the bus stop for school, and you got like 20 minutes of a walk, you know, that would just be like comic book stories. You know, I'd just come up with stories, and then you multiply that across all the sort of empty time in your life. You know, all of it. You know, like you're bored at work. You know, so I think for me, there's always been this sort of like generative. I've always been creating these stories in my head, and like characters and things and costumes and the world, the larger world.
Yeah.
And then you like the wheels hit the ground and you start actually making the book. There's early on in the book, there's a huge crowd scene with like about 100 different supervillains.
Mhm.
And after that, I thought I was done. It was so hard to just come up with them. And like I kept a sketchbook, and like I would just sketch out designs, sketch out characters, and try to like, I was like, just, I knew the scene was coming up. So I was always trying to like build them out. And then for the book, I have a doc on my phone, a note that I keep. And whenever I hear a good supervillain name, I write it down. So I've got a list of like 1,000 supervillain names. And like whenever I have an idea for a costume, I'll sketch it down. So I always got it in my back pocket. But like, it didn't take long into the second issue where I was like, oh my God, I'm tapped. Like that sort of imaginative power has been sort of funneled out of me. And the day-to-day of doing the book, which is not fun, sexy, or imaginative, which is just sort of like, you have to put these people on a city block. That city block has to have buildings. That city has to have cars. The very prosaic, all that stuff you still have to sort of generate from your imagination. And then you find that like you're left not a lot of the like, well, what's this alien race going to look like? So I learned, and people differ on this. I think now with the conversations around AI, there's a lot of anxiety among creators about like the value of creativity, where it comes from, what is something that helps it and enables it, and what is something that is sort of an existential danger to it. And without weighing in on that part of the conversation, I did sort of like change my opinion, like not changed my opinion. I just grew. I evolved. Like in the beginning, I was like, everything should come from me. Sidebar on a story that I copied from a DC villain. But then it sort of became like, here's a good for instance in the fourth issue, which isn't it's about to be reprinted. I'm not sure if you've seen it yet. In the fourth issue, I was just not related to the book because these like each issue takes me so long. In addition to while I'm working on the issue, I've got other things. Like I read a book and I really like the book, or just get kind of caught up with something. I was like crazy about this idea of vaporwave. Have you guys heard of vaporwave?
Mm.
Okay, so it's like it's hard to tell. Is it an art movement or is it a style of music? It's this sort of like kind of retro-y, like when you think of like the 80s retro, like it's a neon ring and there's like a serrated sunset, with like from blue to
Oh,
purple, and then like there's a lot of sort of like retro imagery and the music is very like I would say like ambient and
okay.
maybe a little melancholy. But I was really like caught up with this sort of like this idea, this sort of like weird art movement that was in visual art and in music and kind of longed for a lost, slightly ruined time that you could not get back to. And so for the I'm sorry, I said fourth, the fifth issue, like there were a lot of opportunity. So malls figure prominently in vaporwave, and this is sort of like a movement that came along, I think, with millennials. So it's not like they were mall kids; they were kids who sort of like observed pictures of malls from like when we, or I shouldn't say we. I think I'm older than you.
We, right? Yeah.
So when Gen Xers were younger, we
Yeah.
lived in malls, and then these kids see pictures of malls, and they're these weird ruins to them, that they think are fun and want to excavate. And what is a chess king, and so like I had a mall sequence, and I got to sort of like bring that influence into the design for the mall. And then over every issue, there's just little areas where you can kind of take the stuff that you're personally interested in and funnel that into the work, and it helps take a little of the creative labor off of you because you've got like building blocks that are already sort of like in the world creatively that you can kind of it's like skinning a video game, like you've done the hard part of like making the actual code, but now you can kind of like just pull these skins off and work them in.
Yeah.
And that I find really it offloads a lot of work for me, and then B, I like that the books, when I look back at them, like they capture these periods of interest for me, that I like. A lot of the book, the first issue, the first three issues are sort of, if you look at the covers and things, they're very noir coded. The book itself isn't. I think the book it's a kind of a sleight of hand. Like I gave it these noir covers, but it really isn't a noir story. But like again, like that was something I was like really taken with at the time, and I love that kind of look, and I love the desaturated colors, and I really wanted to like kind of push that. And then with each story, you kind of like you get to I feel like in the overarching arc, there's a design style book that you set up, and then for each issue, you can kind of like dig in a little with how you want them to look. And I really like that. Although I have to say, I'm always fascinated by other people's work where it's just they have just endless worlds in their own head, and they're able to just constantly pull about. So if you can do that, man, that's the real gold.
I'm curious. We are Gen X. We're a Gen X podcast. Both Danny and I are the same age, and so I think that we're really lucky that we grew up with such cool. I mean, comic books. We grew up with cool cartoons. We grew up with really cool music. I'm curious, what are some of the things that you grew up on that have influenced your work, or just that you loved as a kid? Maybe not necessarily influenced, but just that you loved.
Well, to kind of go back to what you had earlier asked about pop culture relevancy, I think isn't that just being Gen X means that you are sort of like pop culture relevant? Like our whole thing was being, like savvy to pop culture, like even the sort of not even the not most nerdy about it we're like deeply, like I think we just have pop culture relevancy. And I think it's interesting because look around right now at the landscape now, and which obviously there's a lot of new stuff, TikTok, and there's a lot of new stuff that is always being coming into play. But like, when I was a kid, it was G.I. Joe, Transformers, Masters of the Universe. You look around, it's G.I. Joe, Transformers, Masters of the Universe, and I feel like Star Wars, Star Trek, the Marvel, the event, like I just feel like all the stuff that all the sort of relevancy that we had has, whether I don't know, because we forced it or not, has remained sort of relative touch points. And to the point where I feel bad for kids, because I'm like, oh my God, like, you guys need new toys. You shouldn't be playing with Transformers. Like, you should have your own new thing, whatever it is you kids are into. Uh, so I think just being Gen X kind of makes you like I think part of what defines us is our immediacy in pop culture, and
Interesting. Okay.
I think what I think is kind of interesting is how, like, again, this is slightly controversial, and I don't want to weigh in on whether it's good or bad. To me, fandom, like, as a creator, I kind of feel like, and as like, I think I'm not a committee, like I'm one dude. So like whatever you believe about the book is completely fine, but it's not, like there's only canon from me, which isn't to say, but so that sense of ownership, I am amazed at like fandoms where like fans have a lot of power to push against what creators intend or what creators want. And think about how much gets changed, because of, and I again, I don't think it's good or bad. I'm not saying that like, oh, fans shouldn't be able to dictate. Of course they should. The audience is an extremely important part of the equation. And I'm not saying that creators should be dictators where they say, like it's what like it's only what George Lucas wants. But I do think there's an interesting tension. What has happened is that fandom has kind of risen in, I don't think it's risen in its power necessarily, but it has risen in its sort of collective actions. And that is interesting because I think a lot of people would say, so take Star Wars, and I'm just going to talk about the original George Lucas 3, Star Wars, Empire, and Return of the Jedi. There are things that people could probably say, oh, we hate the Ewoks. George, get rid of them. Or you could have seen like we're seeing images now from Superman, the new James Gunn Superman.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure people are, en masse,
Yeah,
thumbs up or thumbs downing it. But the thing that makes Star Wars so unique and kind of amazing is that it's the product of a lot of people, but it's one engine is driving it. And you don't want to come in and step in and say, like, I want to drive the engine that drives the thing. You want to say, like, even if it goes in directions I don't want to, I'm along for the ride because nothing else is like it. And I think that is kind of giving way to a sense of ownership in fandom that is, I don't know, it's interesting. And as things kind of become less, like, I think of the Muppets, like for me, which is not, this is only for me, and I don't think everyone has to adopt this policy. But when Jim Henson died, the Muppets ended. And I'm glad that there's more Muppet stuff, but like it's like now it's Muppets 2.0. And I think as things get further away from the sort of impetus that created them, they lose a little of that agency too. Because like, who could come back and say about Star Wars now, well, this is George's vision, so it's correct. And you kind of have to say, like, it's anybody's guess now. The fans are just as right as the creators. Who has more ownership is hard to. So either way, that's just an interesting. I don't know how I got on this tangent.
Well, I think a lot of the ownership now, or the canon voices, are coming from I don't want to say a small minority of vocal people on social media, but it seems that way. If you look at take Star Wars, you look at the people who are fighting back, or, oh, it can't be all female led with like the Acolyte now, and they're very vocal against that, which I think is just absurd because the Acolyte is great. I love it. It's probably one of the top rated live action Star Wars content that's currently out there. But to have those people be so vocal and it's really just, review bombing it and taking it down any way they can just really upsets me. It really does, because it makes people not want to watch the shows even though they're really good.
No, I think that's well. Let me step back for a second because I just want to be very, very like 100% clear that like what you're describing, toxic fandom is. I don't think of that as like.
Okay.
I don't think of that as fandom.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I hear you.
Maybe that's not fair of me. Like even a bad fan is still a fan, but like toxic fandom to me is just more of a byproduct of like toxic social media, which is like, hey, you give a microphone to anybody and you're going to hear a lot of stuff. Not all of it is good or useful or relevant.
Yeah.
And I don't think it. Like I feel like all of those are bad faith arguments. Like if you want fewer women in Star Wars, fucking die mad. I don't know what to tell you. But I think here's all right. I'm gonna come. Send hate mail if you want. I'm not gonna limit anybody. I did not love the Ryan. I love Ryan Johnson. I did not love Ryan Johnson's Star Wars, which is it, Last of the Jedi.
Last Jedi, yeah.
Yeah. I don't. I'm not. My beefs with it are very small and petty, and they have nothing to do with any of it. It's just certain things that I like. I didn't love the Casino Planet part. I felt like it lagged a little. There's some structural things that didn't work. The Poe Rebellion didn't work for me. Like when you marry it to these other ideas, like anybody can be a Skywalker. It doesn't have to, or anyone can be a Jedi. You don't have to be a Skywalker. Love that. In fact, I never thought only Skywalkers could be Jedi. I thought the Force is in all of us. So I think that anyone can critically push back against something. Hey, this didn't work for me. Has nothing to like, which is fine. You can hold both. Like, oh, this didn't work for me. That doesn't mean it's a failure or bad. It just means that I didn't like it. Also, that doesn't mean I side with the people who are like, I hate Rose Tico. Like, you are garbage. Your argument is stupid.
Yeah,
we're not on the same side. So, and I think with Star Wars now, I think like the Disney Star Wars, like, look, Disney is a huge and extremely competent machine. It has a lot of different people who are coming in from different angles. There are younger people who know the cartoons, way better than they know, like, and every now and then I'll watch Star Wars and think like, what does a kid think? This looks like an old movie, it almost looks like it should be in black and white. So of course, young people are going to respond to other stuff better, or the prequels or the sequels. So like there are some fans who like this and some fans who like that. And as the sort of stewards of the Star Wars, product, they should hit everybody. Like there was one with it was a cartoon. Forgive me, I don't know it very well. I think there was like a little kid Ewok Jedi.
Tales of the Jedi. Yeah.
Tales of the Jedi. Okay. Yeah. So like I love the Ewoks. I was perfect age, loved them. I will hear no Ewok discrediting. But I knew as soon as I saw the little Ewok jumping around the lightsaber, I was like, oh my God. Some people are gonna flip the fuck out. But you know what? If some kid sees that and like loves it, and why wouldn't they? It's a fuzzy little thing with a lightsaber. Like it's not all for you. I guess that's just to take it back to the toxicness of social media. Not everybody's talking to you, and this isn't for you. Like when somebody says something you find offensive, like maybe they weren't speaking to you, maybe they weren't saying like you directly are this bad thing that I don't like. Yeah. So it's okay to ignore, it's okay to like, you know what? I don't want to be the old man preaching about best practices on social media.
Well, speaking of things that people like, you have talked about how music influenced your work with like bands like Susie and the Banshees, things like that. I'm really curious, what are you currently listening to now that has got your creative juices going?
Gabe, thank you so much. I like this. I love this question more than any of the comic questions, because I think like this, or I should. if you ask a person what their influences are, they are never going to be honest. You know what I mean? They're going to tell you like Pitchfork approved, but not the actual. And also, no one wants to be so nakedly exposed at like, hey, this is the thing I'm totally copying. So like, I feel like the influences question is always kind of like, I always feel like, oh, no one's ever going to give the real answer. I don't, I never do. But talking about music is, I think, like so much of this book for me is about like it is not about like its ancestors aren't in comics, its ancestors are in music. Like so, and I'm so glad you brought up Susie and the Banshees. The book is called Gun. It has nothing to do with guns. I'm a hardcore liberal, two-way control, please. Uh, 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 it's the good guys are called capes and bad guys are called guns, and that's just their lingo. And I thought that was like a fun. I thought it was a fun kind of hip. Oh, hip. Yeah. Listen, I thought it was just like a fun kind of like term of insider term that they would use. And I was listening to Susie and the Banshees cover of a song by John Cale called "Gun." Which if you listen to it, which first of all, it's a fantastic song. So go treat yourself. But if you listen to it, it just describes this world with these people who I think are like, I guess they're like mercenaries or just weird, weird operatives who work in a sort of violent world. And, there's always sort of like mayhem and violence around every corner. And I was like, oh, that's what I want to conjure in this book. I want this book to be about these people who are just sort of like live in just constant chaos. And because that's the beauty of being a villain is you're not restricted by order. You're allowed to kind of like, and then for every issue that I do, I set up a playlist, like a soundtrack, which is, and I am not kidding when I say this. This is not a soundtrack. Like these were vibes that I was listening to while I was composing. This is the music you should be hearing while you are reading it. It should be playing in the background, nice. Like in a movie. And these are so like it is such an act of restraint on my part to not actually put time codes like this part of the song. But at a certain point, you have to let go, right? You can't go through life being that.
Play when you turn page 1.
Yes, exactly. Cue it up too. So, and these things are not like again. If people understood how hard I work at, like no, this song isn't right. There's a mood you want to go for in this song, but I also kind of think like a thing that I love about movies is that like sometimes the right song in the right spot changes everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it sucks that comics doesn't have that. And they're two different mediums, and you just have to, at a certain point, you have to accept that. But I do try to kind of like cheat a little and say like, hey, this is sort of, and that is a big part of the creative process for me. Because I think for a lot of reasons, I think like, I think it does kind of set the tone. Like I think like when you hear a music cue and I try to not be obscure or weird about it. I try to stuff that you're like, oh, like even if you don't go to Spotify and play it, you'll I know what that song is, or I know what this song is. And I also think that like we as people live in the real world. And the real world is soundtrack. When you go to the grocery store, there's music. So I kind of like I want that to sort of be infused in the book. Although there is a thing that I notice among what I would say are younger creators, which is a lot of like Lana Del Rey came around for me. So like I was an existing person doing stuff creatively before Lana Del Rey came on the scene, which is not to say, only to say a thing that I hear in a lot of Lana Del Rey's music that I hear in a lot of everybody's music is like they will drop a music, like listening to Sun Ra or they'll insert the name of a song or an artist that they like, and it's kind of like oh, I love Bowie or and it gives you a little bit of like it's their pedigree, right? Like, look, I have great taste. I like these great things, and I think particularly with like issue titles, there's like a real shortcut is to just do a song, a song title, and everyone's like, oh, but I think for me personally, this is not anybody else. I just think for me personally, I think like a lot of my creative process writing wise is like, okay, the first thing that comes to your mind is great. Kick that to the side. You may still keep it, but just kick it away and see what's behind it. Because I noticed that when I was writing dialogue for my main character, Trevor, he's quippy, and frequently his response to things would be like something funny. And when you get something funny, you're like, done. Like that was the job. But I noticed when you kick the joke away, then the reply would actually be a character moment. It would be something true to the character, something in the character's real voice. It isn't about, like writing jokes and being funny is a kind of like, it's not that it's easy, but it keeps you from, people can listen to patter and never get bored. But the point of writing isn't about keeping people from being bored. The point of writing is to, like, here's something I understand about the world, or I think I understand about the world, and I want you to see it the way I see it.
Yeah.
I want to share it with you. I want you to understand it too. And so I think, like, you sometimes have to, like, sacrifice the funny quip for maybe the emotional truth. And I think that's also like, hey, what's the thing you come up with it? Like, the issue that I'm working on now, yes, I've been working on it for a very long time. When I started, I wanted, for reasons that relate to the plot, to call it Takeoffs and Landings. And halfway through, which is like a year into it, I found out that a band that I really like, Rilo Kiley, one of their albums was called Takeoffs and Landings. And I was like, oh, I don't want people to think I'm making a Rilo Kiley reference. A, first of all, if it's accidental, and then B, like, I just don't want to, like, it's that same thing as the quip. What you're doing is inserting something that's easy, but if you take that away, you might replace it with something that is, like, has more meaning. And I did finally land on something else that I love, but I'm not going to give it away because it's a spoiler.
Awesome. I had a question, and this goes back a little bit to your publishing side of things. How did you come up with the name of Reckless Eyeballs Press?
Really, you know what? That's fun. This goes back for a long ways. When I first started just doing stuff creatively, like, I had a bunch of, like, I wrote poetry, and I did illustration and all these other little things. Some short stories. I wrote a script that, like, I wanted to put in one bucket where it'd be easy to sort of find all, like, if you're looking for stuff by me, I wanted one bucket where you could find it. But, like, the comic is, the comic will appeal to comic people. Comic people are not reading poetry. Poetry people are not reading comics. So, like, I wanted one bucket to put everything in, and then, like, individually it could go out to smaller buckets. And that's tough. Like, I have a hard time with, like, oh, what's the name? And so I was working on this is a crazy story. I grew up in a town, St. Petersburg in Florida. There was a young man, I should say there. It's a little piece that sticks off on the Gulf Coast side. There was a crazy gay serial killer in my town. And one night, two young men went missing from a bar. And I was in the bar that night.
Whoa.
And I had a friend who did videography, so not long, there was what happened to these kids for a while, and then I want to say, like, 6 months, maybe a year later, they found the guy that did it. And this, like, what you hear about serial killers is, like, oh, bit of a loner, quiet guy, kept to himself. This guy, social guy, I knew him. Everyone in the gay community knew him. Like, this dude he was part of a dart league. He was out every week. It was shocking.
Oh, shocking. My goodness.
So my friend who was a videographer, all right, let's tread carefully. I was talking to a friend of mine about, like, hey, can you believe it was this dude? And my friend told me this story about going home with this guy, and, like, they did some drugs, and he kind of did too many and kind of passed out and was, like, coming to with, like, a gas mask on and just crazy stuff. And then the next day, when he sort of, like, woke up, he got home and was fine. And then he called the dude and was like, you got to be careful. You're going to hurt somebody. Like, and little did he know, like, holy shit, dude, you don't know how dangerous the situation you were in was.
Wow.
Now, when this kid told me the story, this was riveting. And I knew a lot of people, like, everyone knew this guy. Like, I was like, we are ground zero for this. This is such an insane story. My friend was a videographer. I was like, let's just do a documentary. And So we started interviewing people, and I have to tell you, as soon as they saw that red light, you might have this problem. Like, this kid didn't want to admit to doing drugs. He did not want to admit to this sort of like crazy sex stuff. I don't blame him. But like that across a million, like just everyone behaved very differently. And what was neat was sort of getting this like weird behind the scene, not behind the scene, I don't know how to describe it. This weird sort of like look at this incident from like candid sources. And then that was just not translating. Either way, while we were working on that, we were trying to come up with a name for the production company for that. And there's a John Waters has a phrase. He didn't come up with it, but he's done a lot of work with prisons and like with inmates. One of the terms he heard from some of his inmate friends was a CO, a corrections officer, could give you a demerit. Like even if you didn't like hit him or say anything belligerent, he could give you a demerit just for cutting him eyes, and then we call that reckless eyeballs. Like inmate 202, reckless eyeballs, and then you and that just stuck in my head. And then we were doing this weird documentary, and I thought, oh, reckless eyeballs feels like a perfect fit for it. And then I went and looked, and it wasn't like for Google search. Like nobody had it. Like so, like when you typed in reckless eyeballs, my site was the first thing that came up. And so like I was like, oh, this is extremely valuable. And if you type in Jack Foster, there's a million, but here's this one thing that I would kind of like have a little bit of ownership of. So over time, I was just like, oh, that's my bucket that I put everything in. And cool. That's the weird, crazy origin of that. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that wild about the serial killer?
That's crazy.
That's crazy. But whenever I see documentaries on serial killers, it always makes me paranoid that like 1 out of 4 people could be a serial killer. So then I start looking at people I know, like, are you a serial killer? Like, could you be a serial killer? Like, it just because there has to be serial killers out there that you come across in your life that you don't become a victim to. But like, there's crazy people. Like, I don't know. It just freaks me out. It terrifies me.
Let me, not to make you more paranoid, but we talked to a guy who is I think I was like a psychiatrist or a psychologist, or we were like, this is so crazy. This was a very social guy. This is just insane that because it just doesn't fit the profile. This isn't like a weirdo Jeffrey Dahmer. And he's like, oh, no. You do not understand. Like every day is trying to pass as being just like you or me. You know, and the ones who maybe don't do it as well just aren't as good at passing. But like what we think is, oh, if you were to bump into a person, if you were to meet a person who had this inside them, who was just so, you know, like so bent in this other direction, so, you know, I don't know, evil, you would instantly detect it, you know, like you would sense it in some way. And the reason these people are able to pull off what they do, the reason they are able to succeed at what they do is because it's impossible to tell. There is no tell. Like it's just, it's an illusion that is flawless.
Yeah. I was just watching Serial Mom. And that's part of the thing is that, you know, when they're questioning, they're like, oh, you couldn't pick a more normal woman like Mrs. Southfin. Like she's so like, you know, American apple pie. And yet she's like this deviant, like serial killer. You know, what makes it really funny, but yeah, totally terrifying.
See Willows. Oh, cocksucker residents. I'm afraid whatever I call it. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if am I allowed to say
Yeah.
Whatever I call them, cocksucker residents.
It's such a great film. I love John Waters. He's amazing.
Have you seen the exhibit up in the Academy Museum?
I haven't. I saw that Ed was there and we posted a bunch of pictures of all the stuff that he saw and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, I have to go check it out.
Here's what I'll say. If you've seen the DVDs with commentary, you kind of have all the information. It's nice to see the actual artifacts, like some of the original pieces. Anything I think kind of before Desperate Living is, you know, that stuff just wasn't made to nobody was archiving stuff at that point. You know, like it was all they could do to get it to last through the production. But you know, but it is neat to see some of the original like flyers and things and posters and then later on the costumes and stuff. So it's a great exhibit. I think you won't come across new information if you're a diehard John Waters fan. Like you know, if you've listened to interviews with him and or listened to the commentary, like a lot of the information he's he tells those stories a lot, and they're out there. So nothing new in it, but it is neat to kind of see the artifacts.
Yeah, nice. Speaking of events or exhibits, are you going to be at San Diego Comic-Con?
So a problem with indies is inventory, like because printing is expensive, and I ran the initial Kickstarter, and then I ran a second Kickstarter when I did the volume, the trade paperback. But the individual issues, I try to just I cover the printing myself, and then over time I sell enough that it pays itself off. And also, I think single issues, like it's a trade paperback is a much more expensive proposition, but single issues, this is my job. I should be able to finance it. So keeping inventory, I do small print runs, and then they'll last for a little while, and then you'll fall out. And then the comic mentality, the comic readers mentality, God love them. Like if issue 2 isn't there, they're not going to buy issue 1. I get it, but it's hard to keep full inventory on now it's 7 different books. So I've been out of inventory. So the first 3 issues of the first story arc, and then the next story arc, Slaughter Ball, which is all the supervillains do this sport. It's kind of like the Cannonball Run. There's a big USA-sized football field, the size of the United States, and each coast is an end zone. And there's a time bomb called the Slaughter Ball, and they have to get it to one coast or the other in 7 days, or it goes off. So the first 3 issues of that, technically in the timeline, gun number 4, gun number 5, gun number 6, Slaughter Ball 1, 2, and 3, I'm out of print on. And I have been planning to reprint them. And then I was going to do a new batch of covers, so that people who, if they want to get, there's a value incentive to get the reprint. But then halfway through the process, I fell in love with that Black Label Prestige Plus slightly magazine size comic.
Okay.
I think art really just, it's no secret that it's the better artists that they've been putting on these books. Art just really sings at that sort of slightly larger size. And the real trick is when you blow a book up from regular size to this Prestige Plus size, the word bubbles stay the same size. So they don't have to get increased, but all the art gets to suddenly the claustrophobic, especially me because I'm very dense, all that claustrophobia of being stuck in all those panels and having 20 panels on a page, suddenly everything can breathe and the artwork just gets to sing. So I was well, I'm going to reprint them anyway. So why not switch everything over to this other size? And then that ended up being talk about biting off more than you can gag on. So I've been doing that. I'm almost done with that. I think we're going to be ready to release in September. What I'd like to do is just relaunch 1, 2, 3, and then the new issue for each 1 week in September. First week is issue 1, next week is issue 2, and then I'll make a little slipcase because I asked people hey, what do you think of the size? And like all comic stuff, half the people love it, and the other half it doesn't fit in comic boxes. So I was all right, look, I'll make a slipcase. I'll leave a spot for the last issue. You can put it on the bookshelf with the other pretty books. You don't have to put it in a comic box. So my plan is that in September we'll have all that, and then the new issue will be released it'll be the 4th last part of that. So I have been sort of in this landing the home stretch for 7 months, and I just wanted to take a couple of these conventions off, and in particular, I don't booth at San Diego. It's a waiting list, hard to get on. So I just go there and do signings at some places and kind of mill around. But I was save yourself the money and don't go this time. But I'm part of an anthology for a LGBT anthology. Do you guys know David Boer?
I don't.
He's he did Canto, and he did the really cool Advanced Dungeons based on the comic or the cartoon from when we were kids. He's done a bunch of stuff. He asked me specifically to do the art for a story he wanted to do for this anthology, and which was very flattering. He works with a lot of great artists. He had Chris Sheehan on covers for his book specs. So and David's a great guy. It was an honor to get to work with him. So we did the story, and it's going to be in this anthology. They're rushing to have it printed in time for Comic-Con. If they do, we're going to do a couple of signings.
Oh.
So I will have to show up for that. Or no, I will have. I get to. But and I don't know yet. I have to follow up and see if that's going to happen. I went ahead and got my badge just in case. But we'll see. If not, it's always great to go down there. I love conventions. It'll be a lot of fun. So how about you? Are you going?
I'm not. So I'm sort of like not invited to the party this year. I couldn't get a badge. So I'll just be hanging out on the outskirts.
Well, if people want to follow your journey, you said Reckless Eyeballs is your bucket, so you can find you on social media at Reckless Eyeballs. Is that correct?
Yeah. So this was brilliant planning on my part. Reckless Eyeballs. There's enough letters to do it for Instagram, but not enough for Twitter. So I had to go up with. So on Twitter, I'm at the Villainist. I know Twitter is sort of, who knows if it's going to be around much longer. I'm Reckless Eyeballs on Threads and Instagram. You can always find the book is recklesseyeballs.com or guncomic.com.
Yeah.
And then what's the other one? Blue Sky. I think I might just be Jack Foster on Blue Sky. But if you go to Instagram, there's like they have those little bio things.
Yeah.
So like if you hit that, it'll show you where you can find everything. And then like I said at the top, if people go to Global Comics, you can read the first volume for free.
Right.
So and then there's a lot of sample stuff. Like I think the first 16 pages of every issue is sampled out on the website. So easy to find and easy to follow. And also so this isn't trying to gin up interest in the book. This is genuinely true. I have a small readership. The nice thing, the great thing, the thing that I wish you could keep as the readership gets bigger, unfortunately, is that it's very personal. Like one of the first people, like at my first convention, one of the first fans. If you're not watching the video, I'm doing scare quotes. A couple years ago invited me to his wedding. He stuck with me through the book, invited me to his wedding. And I can't say that I'm going to go to everybody's wedding. I'm just if you send a message to the website, it goes to me. It's not like I have the staff of people. And what's nice is I do this thing and I love it. And it really just means the world to me. But doing this puts me in the orbit of it puts me in the orbit of other creators who do this thing that I love. Puts me in the orbit of people like yourself who are doing their own thing and that overlaps. And it's always a blast because we all love the same things. And then it puts me in the orbit of people who like the stuff and they end up being more often than not really rad. So reach out, I love hearing from people. If you like the book, by all means, let me know. If you don't, please don't.
And look for the big button on his website that says, invite me to your wedding.
Yeah. Exactly. Guys, thank you so much for having me on. This is so much fun. This was a total blast. I'm sorry if I talked too much.
No, not at all. I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure. For everyone out there, definitely check out Gun. We'll have the link in our description so that you can check it out for free. Highly recommend that. Follow Jack on his social media platform and all the future endeavors that he has will be coming out. So thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.